Valerie Jacobson's journey into the Navy was not just a career decision, but a leap towards freedom, independence, and self-discovery. Born in a small town in Ohio, Valerie grew up facing many challenges, both external and internal. Valerie was known for her sharp intellect and curiosity, qualities that set her apart from her peers. She was always the student who raised her hand in class, never afraid to question the obvious, and her teachers often described her as someone with a bright spark. However, behind that spark was a deep struggle that she carried alone. Valerie knew from a young age that she was different. Growing up in a conservative community, she quickly learned that certain aspects of herself were better kept hidden. During her teenage years, this meant enduring taunts and alienation from friends who sensed that she did not quite fit the mold they expected. The rigid expectations placed on her and the fear of rejection from her own family were heavy burdens. Joining the Navy right after high school was a bold choice for Valerie. It was not just an escape, but also a way to prove herself to a world that had always doubted her. In the Navy, she hoped to find the structure and discipline that would allow her to thrive, to transform herself into someone capable of overcoming the prejudices she had faced. Boot camp was tough, and the early days were grueling, filled with rigorous training, sleepless nights, and physical challenges that pushed her to the limit. Valerie, however, had a reason to push harder than most. This was her chance to redefine herself. Her determination quickly paid off. Valerie gained the respect of her peers and superiors, and she became known for her exceptional attention to detail. Every morning, she ensured her uniform was pressed to perfection, her boots polished until they gleamed. It was a reflection of her dedication, not just to her role in the Navy, but also to the idea of presenting herself in the best possible light. Despite her success in her military career, Valerie remained somewhat of a mystery to her colleagues. She was often friendly but never too open, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. Valerie's commitment to her career left little time for her personal life. Though she made a few close friends, she remained guarded, especially regarding her romantic interests. Deep inside, she carried a fear that her secret, her identity as a transgender woman, could not only jeopardize her career, but also place her in danger within the close-knit, often conservative culture of the military. She did everything she could to blend in, to be the best officer she could be, so that no one would question or look too closely at her personal life. It was in Jacksonville, Florida, where Valerie's path crossed with Tucker Jacobson's. At first, it seemed like fate had brought them together. Tucker, a civilian contractor working near the naval base, was charming, outgoing, and confident, qualities that stood in contrast to Valerie's quieter demeanor. Their initial meeting at a local coffee shop seemed serendipitous. Tucker had accidentally taken Valerie's order, and when he realized the mistake, he offered to buy her a fresh cup. What started as a brief apology turned into a long conversation, and before long, they were exchanging phone numbers. Their romance progressed quickly, and within 6 months, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony. To friends, it appeared that Valerie had finally found the happiness that had always seemed just out of reach. The couple settled into a modest home in Jacksonville, and Valerie continued her work with the Navy, balancing her demanding career with her new role as a wife. However, beneath the surface, there were early signs that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. The whirlwind romance between Valerie and Tucker was marked by both intense passion and subtle unease. Valerie was drawn to Tucker's outgoing nature, his seemingly effortless confidence, and his ability to make her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. Tucker seemed genuinely interested in Valerie's work, asking questions about her day and her experiences in the Navy. He admired her dedication and often boasted to friends about her accomplishments, proud to be married to someone so disciplined and capable. But there were cracks in the relationship that became more pronounced over time. Valerie's relationship with Tucker's mother, Miriam, was strained from the beginning. Miriam had never been particularly warm to Valerie, and her demeanor was often cold and judgmental. During family gatherings, Miriam would make passive-aggressive remarks about Valerie's dedication to her career, implying that she should focus more on being a good wife. Tucker deserves someone who'll be there for him, Miriam would say, her voice dripping with disapproval. Valerie, though hurt by the comments, always remained polite, refusing to engage in the brewing conflict. Tucker, too, began to change after the wedding. The carefree man who had swept Valerie off her feet started to show signs of insecurity and control. He began to question Valerie's long hours, often accusing her of prioritizing her career over their marriage. At first, the arguments were minor. Tucker would complain when Valerie had to stay late at the base or when she would come home too tired to engage in social activities. Over time, his behavior became more controlling. He wanted to know where Valerie was at all times, and he often went through her phone, claiming he was just being protective. Valerie felt herself growing more isolated, her once bright demeanor becoming more subdued. Despite the growing tension, Valerie tried to hold on to the relationship. She wanted to believe in the love they once had, and she feared what might happen if Tucker discovered her secret. Valerie had always planned to tell Tucker that she was transgender, but the longer she waited, the harder it became. She feared his reaction, feared that he might reject her or even harm her if he knew. The weight of this secret became an ever-present burden, and Valerie found herself constantly on edge, trying to navigate her marriage without revealing too much. Miriam's interference only made things worse. She would frequently drop by unannounced, her presence a constant reminder to Valerie that she was never truly accepted. Miriam's behavior towards Valerie was fueled by a deep-seated animosity that seemed to go beyond mere disapproval. Miriam had her own secrets. Her involvement with a dangerous drug dealer and her struggles with addiction had made her desperate and unstable. She saw Valerie as an outsider, someone who threatened her control over Tucker, and she did everything in her power to drive a wedge between them. The relationship became increasingly toxic, with Valerie feeling trapped between her fear of losing Tucker and her fear of revealing her true self. The love that had once brought them together had turned into a fragile, volatile connection, one that seemed ready to shatter at any moment. Valerie's friends noticed her change in demeanor. She had always been a private person, but now she seemed almost withdrawn, her once bright eyes now clouded with worry. When they asked if everything was all right, Valerie would force a smile and assure them that she was just tired, that work had been demanding. Valerie's secret was a heavy burden, one that affected every aspect of her life. The decision to transition had been one of the most difficult and important choices she had ever made. It was a journey that had required immense courage, especially in a world that was often unaccepting and unkind. Growing up in a conservative community, Valerie had quickly learned to hide her true self. She knew that if she ever wanted to live authentically, she would have to leave behind everything she knew, including her family, who she feared would never accept her. The Navy, with its strict rules and expectations, was both a refuge and a source of anxiety for Valerie. On one hand, it provided her with the structure she craved, a sense of purpose that kept her grounded. On the other hand, it was a constant reminder of the need to conform, to fit in, to avoid drawing attention to herself. Valerie had worked tirelessly to prove herself, to show that she was just as capable as anyone else, if not more so. She had always been careful, always on guard, knowing that one mistake could cost her everything. When she met Tucker, Valerie thought she had finally found someone with whom she could share her life. But as their relationship progressed, the fear of losing him became overwhelming. She wanted to tell him, to trust him with her truth, but every time she tried, the words caught in her throat. What if he rejected her? What if he told others? The risks were too great, and so Valerie chose to keep her secret, hoping that one day she might find the right moment to tell him. But that moment never came. Instead, Tucker found out on his own. It is unclear exactly how Tucker discovered the truth, but what is certain is that it changed everything. The man who had once been loving and attentive became cold and distant. The arguments that had once been about Valerie's work or her time away from home took on a new, more dangerous edge. Tucker's anger was palpable, a simmering rage that seemed ready to boil over at any moment. He began to make cruel comments, attacking Valerie's identity in ways that cut deeply. Valerie, terrified of what Tucker might do, tried to placate him, to reassure him that she was still the same person he had fallen in love with. But Tucker was not interested in reassurance. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry. His mother, Miriam, only fueled his anger, whispering in his ear that Valerie had deceived him, that she was not to be trusted. Miriam's own instability, her involvement with dangerous people, and her resentment towards Valerie made her an eager accomplice in the unfolding tragedy. On the morning of April 18, 2019, the Jacksonville police received a frantic 911 call from Tucker Jacobson. His voice was panicked as he claimed to have found his wife, Valerie, dead in their home. Officers arrived at the scene within minutes, finding Valerie's lifeless body in the master bedroom. The room bore signs of a violent struggle. Furniture overturned, a shattered lamp on the floor, and blood splattered across the walls. Valerie had suffered multiple stab wounds, and there were clear signs of strangulation. It was a brutal, personal attack, one that spoke to the deep anger and hatred of the perpetrator. Tucker, still at the scene, appeared distraught, his hands trembling as he spoke with officers. He claimed that he had been out running errands and had come home to find Valerie dead. However, detectives quickly became suspicious. There were inconsistencies in Tucker's story. His timeline did not add up, and there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Valerie had known her attacker. Moreover, Tucker's demeanor, while outwardly distressed, seemed rehearsed, as if he were trying too hard to convince the officers of his innocence. Miriam Jacobson was also questioned. She had always made her disdain for Valerie clear, and detectives were curious about her potential involvement. Miriam's relationship with a known drug dealer and her history of substance abuse made her a person of interest. During questioning, Miriam was evasive, her answers vague and contradictory. She claimed to know nothing about what had happened, but her behavior suggested otherwise. Detectives began to suspect that Miriam might have played a role, perhaps not in the actual murder, but in the events that had led up to it. As the investigation progressed, detectives began to unravel the web of secrets that surrounded Valerie's life and death. It soon became clear that the relationship between Valerie and Tucker had been far more troubled than anyone had realized. Interviews with friends and neighbors painted a picture of a marriage that had rapidly deteriorated, with Valerie growing more isolated and Tucker becoming increasingly controlling and erratic. Detectives were also intrigued by Valerie's behavior in the weeks leading up to her death. According to her colleagues at the naval base, she had become more withdrawn, often appearing distracted and anxious. She had confided in a close friend that she was dealing with something personal, something she feared could end her marriage and possibly her career, but she did not go into specifics. This secrecy added another layer to the investigation, as detectives tried to determine what could have made Valerie so fearful. It was during a search of Valerie and Tucker's home that detectives found the key to understanding the true nature of Valerie's fears. Hidden in a locked drawer in Valerie's study, they discovered a series of letters and documents that revealed her transgender identity. The letters were addressed to an old friend from Ohio, someone who had supported Valerie through her transition. In these letters, Valerie expressed her love for Tucker, but also her growing fear of what might happen if he ever discovered her secret. The discovery of Valerie's transgender identity shifted the entire investigation. Detectives now had a clearer motive for the crime. Tucker's anger, his controlling behavior, and his escalating hostility towards Valerie all pointed to a deep-seated transphobia, a hatred that had ultimately led to her death. When detectives confronted Tucker with this information, his reaction was telling. He became agitated, his previous composure unraveling as he tried to deny knowing anything about Valerie's identity. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Further investigation revealed that Tucker had indeed discovered Valerie's secret several weeks before her death. He had accessed her personal emails and found correspondence that revealed her transgender status. This discovery had shattered Tucker's perception of their relationship, leading to feelings of betrayal, anger, and shame. Tucker, who had always prided himself on his traditional views of masculinity and family, could not cope with the reality of Valerie's identity. Instead of seeking understanding or reconciliation, he chose to harbor resentment and anger, emotions that were fueled by his mother, Miriam. Miriam, who had always disliked Valerie, seized on this opportunity to turn Tucker further against her. She fed his insecurities, telling him that Valerie had deceived him, that she was not who she claimed to be. Miriam's involvement with a drug dealer also played a role in the unfolding tragedy. She was desperate for money and stability, and she saw Valerie as an obstacle to her control over Tucker. Detectives discovered that Miriam had even suggested to Tucker that he should take care of Valerie, though it remained unclear whether she had explicitly encouraged violence. The turning point in the investigation came when detectives found evidence linking Tucker to the purchase of the knife used in the murder. Security footage from a local hardware store showed Tucker buying a large kitchen knife just days before Valerie's death. When confronted with this evidence, Tucker's defense crumbled. He admitted to having discovered Valerie's transgender identity, but he claimed that the murder had not been planned. Instead, he argued that it had been a crime of passion, a reaction to the shock and betrayal he felt upon learning the truth. Tucker Jacobson's trial began in October 2019, and it quickly became a media sensation. The case was unique not only because of the brutal nature of the crime, but also because of the issues it brought to light regarding transphobia, intimate partner violence, and the challenges faced by transgender individuals, particularly in professions like the military. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Tucker as a man consumed by rage and hatred. They argued that Tucker's actions were not those of a man caught in a moment of passion, but rather the calculated decisions of someone who felt his masculinity had been threatened. They presented evidence of Tucker's controlling behavior, his history of emotional abuse, and his growing resentment towards Valerie after discovering her transgender identity. The prosecution also highlighted Miriam's role in exacerbating the situation, arguing that her interference had further fueled Tucker's anger and contributed to Valerie's tragic death. Valerie's letters, found in her study, were a key piece of evidence for the prosecution. These letters showed that Valerie had lived in constant fear of being outed, that she had genuinely loved Tucker but had been terrified of how he would react if he learned the truth. The prosecution used these letters to show that Valerie had never intended to deceive Tucker, but had instead been trying to protect herself in a world that was often hostile to people like her. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to portray Tucker as a victim of deception. They argued that he had been pushed to his breaking point by Valerie's secret, that his actions were the result of a moment of intense emotional turmoil. The defense claimed that Tucker had never been violent before, that he had loved Valerie, and had only reacted out of shock and betrayal. They also tried to downplay Miriam's role, arguing that she had merely been a concerned mother who wanted the best for her son. Throughout the trial, Tucker showed little remorse. His demeanor was cold and detached, and he seemed more concerned with justifying his actions than with acknowledging the pain he had caused. The jury, however, was not swayed by his defense. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution's argument that Tucker's actions were motivated by hatred and a desire to protect his own fragile sense of masculinity resonated with the jurors. On November 15, 2019, the jury found Tucker Jacobson guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 25 years. Miriam Jacobson was also sentenced to 5 years in prison for her involvement in drug-related crimes, though she was not directly charged in connection with Valerie's death. The aftermath of Valerie Jacobson's murder was felt far beyond the courtroom. The case drew significant media attention, not only because of the tragic loss of a young Navy officer, but also because of the issues it raised regarding the treatment of transgender individuals, particularly in traditional and often conservative environments like the military. Valerie had dedicated her life to serving her country, yet her life had been cut short because of prejudice and hatred. The LGBTQ+ community, both locally and nationally, rallied around Valerie's story, using it as a platform to raise awareness about the challenges faced by transgender individuals. Advocacy groups highlighted the dangers of transphobia, particularly in intimate relationships, and called for greater protections for transgender people, both within the military and in society at large. Valerie's death became a symbol of the broader struggle for acceptance and equality, a reminder of the work that still needed to be done to ensure that everyone, regardless of their gender identity, could live without fear. The Navy also faced scrutiny in the wake of Valerie's murder. Questions were raised about the support available to LGBTQ+ service members and whether more could have been done to protect Valerie. While the Navy had made strides in recent years towards greater inclusivity, Valerie's death highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by transgender service members, who often face discrimination, isolation, and a lack of understanding from their peers. Valerie's friends and colleagues were left to grapple with the loss of someone who had meant so much to them. They remembered her as a dedicated officer, someone who had always given her best and who had been willing to make sacrifices for the sake of her career. They also remembered her as a friend, someone who had been kind, thoughtful, and always willing to listen. The realization that Valerie had been living with so much fear and pain, that she had felt unable to share her true self with those around her, was a heartbreaking reminder of the importance of acceptance and understanding. Tucker's conviction brought some measure of justice, but it could not undo the harm that had been done. Valerie's life had been cut short, and the dreams she had for her future, the career she had worked so hard for, had been taken from her. The case also served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked prejudice, of the violence that could result when hatred and intolerance were allowed to fester. In the years following the trial, Valerie's story continued to be told, both within the military and in the broader community. Her life and her death became a call to action, a reminder that more needed to be done to protect the rights and lives of transgender individuals. Advocacy groups worked to ensure that Valerie's legacy would not be forgotten, that her story would serve as a catalyst for change. The Jacobson case ultimately exposed the deep-rooted issues of discrimination and violence that continued to affect the LGBTQ+ community. It highlighted the need for greater education, awareness, and empathy, both within intimate relationships and in society as a whole. Valerie Jacobson had dedicated her life to serving her country, and while her life was tragically cut short, her legacy lived on as a symbol of resilience, courage, and the ongoing fight for equality.